Tonight, one man walks free as another stands trial and faces 20 years behind bars. The Kremlin claims they caught Wall Street journalist Evan Gershkovich red-handed. His espionage trial started today and he's being held in secret. At the same time, the man at the center of one of America's biggest ever security breaches, Julian Assange, was reunited with his family.
You have to understand what he's been through. He needs time. He needs to recuperate. And this is a process.
Two very different cases, but both men's supporters say they were thrown in prison for doing their job. Tonight, we'll assess what their cases mean for the future of press freedom. Also coming up, we ask one of the world's richest men, Bill Gates, whether AI is going to destroy the world. He says no, as long as it doesn't fall in the wrong hands.
If you have somebody who's engaged in something like a cyber attack or, political interference, AI could be used by them. And so you have to make sure the good guys are staying ahead.
And the Kenyan president backs down and withdraws his finance bill after protesters stormed parliament and 22 people were reportedly killed. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening. We begin the programme tonight with the tale of two men. Both have made information their trade. Both have been accused of spying and locked up as a result. Today, as WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange pleaded guilty to espionage and walked into the arms of his wife and family, the trial of another journalist was beginning. Evan Gershkovich was put on display in a courtroom cage in central Russia, accused of collecting secret information about a tank factory under the instruction of the CIA. The case is being heard behind closed doors. No evidence has ever been made public. That's why Washington has accused the Kremlin of stockpiling Americans to use as human bargaining chips. Washington also tried for 14 years to extradite Julian Assange. So what does the fate of these two men, both caught up in a messy diplomacy, tell us about the state of global press freedom? We'll discuss that tonight. But let's get started with our first report from our Moscow correspondent, Ivor Bennett.
To begin with, at least, the doors were open and the media let in. American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, but was first on display. The courtroom cage is customary in Russia, and defendants are deemed innocent until proven guilty. But at times here, it doesn't feel like it. The Wall Street Journal reporter is accused of spying for the CIA, and this is all we'll see of him. His trial is being held in secret, behind closed doors. Even these US diplomats were denied entry.
Our hope was to have access. It's not allowed in these type of cases, so we are here for the observations and to make our presence known.
It was here in Yekaterinburg in March last year that Evan Gershkovich was arrested. He's alleged to have collected secrets about a nearby tank factory, a charge he, his employer and the US government all deny. Russia says Evan Gershkovich was caught red-handed, but has never produced any evidence to back that up. And if any is put forward in there, we won't get to see it. This is often the case with trials involving national security here, but the Wall Street Journal says this is a sham. And they're not the only ones who feel the scales of justice may not be balanced here. Vladislav's a local journalist and was in touch with Gershkovich before he was arrested.
I never suspected he was some kind of spy. In my opinion, he's a journalist, a free journalist. Americans are freer in spirit than Russians. And the material that he was preparing, I understand to some extent his journalistic passion, his interest to find something sharp.
At least a dozen US nationals are currently imprisoned in Russia, including former Marine Paul Whelan, who was convicted of espionage in 2020. Washington accuses Moscow of stockpiling Americans to use as human bargaining chips. As for Gershkovich, the Kremlin said there has been contact about a possible prisoner exchange, but that talks must remain private, much like his trial. If convicted, he could face up to 20 years in prison. Ivor Bennett, Sky News, Yekaterinburg.
Now, we've got some breaking news coming out of Bolivia, the Bolivian capital, La Paz. The Bolivian president says that there is irregular military deployment underway in the capital, and there are now fears of a coup. That's Bolivia's president, Luis Arce, who's warning, and he warned on his X account, that an irregular deployment of troops is taking place in the Bolivian capital, La Paz, and there are concerns that a potential coup is underway at present. The president has taken to X, formerly known as Twitter, and put out a message saying that democracy should be respected. That message came out on Bolivian television, and Bolivian television is also showing 2 tanks and a number of military in front of the government palace. So there are concerns and fears of a coup in the Bolivian capital, La Paz, and the president has taken to X to warn of irregular deployment of troops taking place in the Bolivian capital. This echoes what happened about 4 or 5 years ago when there was another coup overthrowing the former Bolivian president, Evo Morales. He too has now taken to X and denounced the movement of the military in the square outside the palace and called it a coup in the making. We are following those developments very closely in the Bolivian capital, La Paz, and we will be bringing you more updates as we get it. Now, we were just discussing the story of Evan Gershkovich. A few hours after Evan's trial got underway, another journalist was celebrating his freedom after a 14-year legal battle. The founder of WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, arrived in Australia a free man. He was released after admitting to 1 count of espionage for leaking secret US military information, a plea meaning he no longer has to spend any time in prison. And a warning, this report from our correspondent Cordelia Lynch contains flash photography from the start.
Julian Assange is finally free. These, his first steps back on Australian soil. After 14 years of fighting, it was a passionate return. A long embrace with his wife, a grateful hug for his father, and a tearful, defining moment for so many of his supporters.
It's teamwork, teamwork. This is people power that got him home. He represents for us the bravery of Australians and the truth-telling. And we don't want America to think that we are a suburb of America.
I just want to know that he is with his family, he's with his children, because they stole his entire 40s.
How does it feel to be a free man, Mr. Assange?
But America did secure a guilty plea. Assange only emerging from this US court in the Pacific after admitting 1 charge of conspiracy to obtain and disclose national defense information. A compromise, yes, but his lawyers see it as a critical win for press freedom. His wife is almost unimaginable.
How did that moment feel, seeing him on the tarmac?
I couldn't believe it. It was unbelievable. And this is real.
And how is he feeling?
Very happy.
He is still a criminal in the eyes of America, but his team is already pushing for a pardon.
How hopeful and how confident are you that your husband will be pardoned? And what do you think has been at the absolute core of the shifting sands here that's enabled his release?
I think he'll be pardoned if the press unite to push back against this precedent. Because it affects all of you. It affects your future ability to inform the public.
He did unite his government. It's soft diplomacy key.
There was nothing to be gained by the further incarceration of Mr. Assange, and we wanted him brought home. Tonight, that has happened. We have got this done.
But to his critics, Julian Assange is a reckless anarchist, a man who endangered lives by leaking state secrets.
Undoubtedly, some of the information that he put on the internet has caused great harm to British military people over the years in places like Iraq and Afghanistan.
Assange inspires extreme feeling, but his lifeline is arguably about something far greater than him. Cordelia Lynch, Sky News, Canberra, Australia.
I'm joined now by Tim Dawson, Deputy General Secretary of the International Federation of Journalists. Thank you very much, Tim, for joining us here on the programme. Did you think that you would see this day, given the litany of charges against Assange and the saga that he went through?
I never gave up hoping. I wasn't incredibly confident, but I could see parallels, with other cases which seemed to go on forever. Nelson Mandela, Birmingham 6, Guildford 4, which I'm not sure I'd ever thought any of those would resolve themselves well, but they all did. So I kept on hoping.
The International Federation of Journalists campaigned for Assange for many years. Just tell me why. There were many who said he wasn't necessarily a journalist, but he did trade in giving information.
Our concern was always that the charges that the Americans sought him under were for activities that journalists carry out every day. He learned of wrongdoing, he found a witness to that wrongdoing, and he then helped that person confidentially pass documents that proved that wrongdoing. And our concern was always that if he was convicted, it would create the possibility that the US Department of Justice could pursue journalists anywhere in the world if they handled national security documents. And that seemed to us to be a terrible, terrible risk.
What's extraordinary about the Assange case, I think, is the fact that, Julian Assange was accused of all of these things, but the New York Times, for example, that published all of these things, did not necessarily face the same persecution and prosecution that he did.
They absolutely didn't. We know that during the Obama presidency, they considered prosecuting Assange. They were clearly very angry with him, and they rejected the idea for that very reason. And even more mysteriously, actually, all of the revelations for which he was pursued in this case had actually been published by a different news, sort of confidential information leaks platform days before Assange did, and they never suffered any legal jeopardy.
The other story we're covering tonight, of course, is of Evan Gershkovich. Very jarring seeing his shaved head in that glass cage, a journalist being treated in this way. He could potentially face 20 years now.
Yeah. It's terrible, and it really underlines that for all the celebrating at Assange's freedom, there are more than 500 journalists in prison around the world, and actually all of them deserve our efforts in one way or another. The one thing that really gives me hope is this. For the last 5 years, when British and American diplomats have made representations on behalf of journalists to the Russians, to the Chinese, to the Iranians, the diplomats they've been speaking with have said, ha ha ha, but Julian Assange, we all lock up journalists. Take the heat off us. That's taken away. So I think that diplomacy from the US and the Americans, if it is put into play on behalf of journalists, will return to being more effective than it's been for the last 5 years. I'm not saying, I'd love to think that would turn the key for Gershkovich. I'm not saying that it will. But I think if any of our colleagues found themselves locked up by a hostile regime, it would mean that our diplomats could more effectively represent them.
I guess the frightening thing is, and this has happened, for a long time, but journalists are used as political pawns by these governments, to try and get what they want from other governments.
They absolutely are. They absolutely are. And, it is a dangerous, occupation which is often in jeopardy. And I think, I take heart from the scale of the campaign on behalf of Julian Assange. I only hope that some of those people will now turn their energy and attention to defending media freedom and journalists more generally.
Tim Dawson, thank you so much for joining us on the programme from the International Federation of Journalists. Now, it's not every day you get to speak to one of the richest people on earth. After creating Microsoft, Bill Gates can now be found pushing for action on climate change through advanced technology. We constantly hear about the threat of AI and just how easy it is to manipulate just about anything. But what does one of the most influential figures in the world of technology think of it all? I caught up with Bill Gates at the Breakthrough Energy Summit this afternoon. Have a listen.
Well, Breakthrough Energy was created to drive innovation to avoid a climate change disaster. What I saw in 2015 when the world came together around the Paris Agreement was that there were no technologies that could deliver products without huge price increases. And so, you know, I talked to governments and I said, you need to raise your research and development budgets, and I'll make sure to raise billions so that whatever good ideas get generated, we can make sure they get funded and get into the marketplace. And so, you know, in the last 9 years, we've backed over 100 companies. We're here, you know, showing the state of progress. And, you know, it makes me optimistic that these technologies will get out and start to bring emissions down.
The goal is to get to zero, and we are hearing some of the poorer developing countries screaming from the rooftops, saying we are on the front lines of this. Get your act together. Do you think the richer nations, the more powerful nations, are getting their act together on this?
Well, the need for the rich countries is not only to zero their emissions, but also to take their ability to fund the R&D and fund the early stage rollouts so that it gets to what I call a zero green premium. So then you can say to the middle income countries, no, this is not more expensive. If it's more expensive, they'll say, hey, the rich countries should fund it, but because that would be hundreds of billions, it'll never happen. And so the only way to square the need to deploy this is to get it so that it's not more expensive. And I wasn't sure how well that would go when I started Breakthrough Energy, and I'm amazed. The human innovation is incredible. When faced with an important challenge like this, these companies have responded.
We read reports, you know, people who have left OpenAI, for example, who are warning that, for example, technologies that are being developed could overthrow the US government. Is that the kind of thing that worries you, that keeps you up at night?
Well, I've not heard that particular scenario. You know, AI is so important that we have to make sure it's mostly being used by people with good intent. So anytime you have a new technology, you know, it's mostly used by teachers and doctors and scientists to help them be more effective. If you have somebody who's engaged in something like a cyber attack or, you know, political interference, AI could be used by them. And so you have to make sure the good guys are staying ahead in detecting and preventing that type of usage.
Are they? Because there are bad actors as well, state-sponsored as well.
No, to date, there's nothing, you know, gigantic about AI. I mean, misinformation is there, but that's nothing to do with AI. It is something that we've got to anticipate and say, okay, if something's not real, you've got to mark it. Because, you know, we know when something's printed on a piece of paper, anybody could have typed it in, but we still think of videos as somehow authentic because it used to be hard to fake. And so a little bit, people have to really ask, okay, where did this come from? There'll be laws creating penalties for fooling people. But, you know, the biggest thing is going to be advancing medical science, advancing education, and, you know, taking this climate issue and getting that innovation to move even faster.
But in terms of cyber attacks, for example, I mean, there are concerns that infrastructure could be targeted and attacked. Hospitals, you know, water, electricity, all of these things could be targeted and hit by the bad actors. You know, there are concerns, genuine concerns around that.
Sure, but we've had that before. I mean, you have the defense, which has to be smarter than the offense, and both sides will use AI to up their game.
If we talk about climate again and also link it to, you know, we're seeing the biggest election year right across the planet, in the United States certainly, and here as well. In the US, I mean, there are concerns that should we see a Trump presidency, some of these big climate pledges that Joe Biden has made could be rolled back. Is that something that worries you?
Well, I think to solve climate, we need fairly consistent policies because we're asking investors at a very large scale to invest in things that have like a 30 or 40-year payback, like a power plant or a cement plant. And so trying to make it so these policies aren't, you know, going one way and back and forth, that would slow down our effort to make progress on this. And I'm hopeful that it's not too partisan of an issue because we all live in the same world.
I guess, if I think to 2016, one of the things that President Trump at the time did was tear up the Paris Climate Accord. Do you think something like that will happen again, where that kind of disruption will disrupt the progress that's being made, the attention that is on this issue, but also row back pledges that have been made?
I think there are Republicans who think it's an important issue and some who don't. We do have to articulate, as you see more bad weather events, as you see a way of solving it by using innovation that also improves our energy security, American jobs, companies going around the world with their great innovative ideas that the U.S. has always been a big part of that. And so, we have to engage the voters on this issue because I believe it's an important issue.
So you don't think it's catastrophic, the direction in which we're going at this stage? Sometimes these reports that come out are quite scary, actually.
Well, the human condition overall is improving. At the turn of the century, 10 million children died every year. Today, partly through things that governments and the Gates Foundation has done, it's under 5 million. And so you wouldn't want to turn the clock back. You read all these scary things. Many of those are real and should drive us to action. But we also shouldn't miss the picture that, the deaths from weather events, are way down. Deaths from earthquakes are way down. And so if we come close to these goals and we build more resilient systems, and for the developing countries, that includes climate adaptation, which is underfunded, continuing to be generous in helping them, every year, overall, humanity will be better off.
And, I guess what I'm trying to get at is the uncertainty of different leaders coming in, different policies. If I was to be completely, blunt, do you think a Donald Trump is seeing that as a priority and will follow through with that? Or do you think his policies, if he does become president at the end of this year, could slow things down for the United States, which does have an impact on the rest of the world?
Yeah, if the U.S. does back off on these tax credits that are really accelerating the innovation, it would slow things down. That would be a setback for the cause. Now, those credits are creating jobs all over the country right now. And so hopefully, by and large, we'll continue backing this innovation, a lot of which is helping create jobs in the U.S.
If it does slow down, what are the consequences?
Well, every year of delay means that particularly the poor countries near the equator, where these are farmers, outdoor farmers who are dependent on every year's crop to avoid malnourishment. That's a much worse situation than in a temperate zone country where you can probably afford 1 year of setback, you have crop insurance, in some cases you have air conditioning. And so the suffering, weirdly, is actually in these countries near the equator that actually did nothing to contribute to the problem.
Are you hopeful about the future of our planet?
Well, I'm lucky. I get to back these innovators. I get to see their work in the lab and help them think, okay, how do we get that out there and avoid millions and millions of tons of emission just for every single company of the over 100 that are here. And so that does make me hopeful. In no sense is this going to be easy. People who say, wait a minute, this would require a huge acceleration in deployment. They're absolutely right. And that's why we bring this community together, governments, big companies, small companies, investors, and say, okay, now let's build the partnerships to surprise people by our speed of implementation.
And in terms of AI, are you at all worried about the future of AI?
Well, certainly AI is a wonderful technology when it's used to help with teaching and health. It'll bring changes that will challenge governments to think, oh my goodness, okay, this is changing, how do we step up? And, it's at a time where do people trust government to step in and do those things? How agile will government be? And so this dialogue where governments are starting to pay attention, That's very important.
Bill Gates, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
That was Bill Gates talking to me a little earlier. Stay with us. Coming up, we'll bring you the latest developments from Bolivia, where there are fears a coup is underway because of what the president described as an irregular military deployment. We'll be bringing you lots more on that story in a moment. Plus, we'll cross live to the spin room inside Nottingham's Trent Newton building, where both Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer have been taking part in the final general election debate.
It's interesting because the whole situation has been evolving quite fast, particularly post-COVID. You know, the old revenge travel type of approach where people were trying to obviously recoup on time lost during lockdown has seen obviously a fast increase in the number of people traveling, not necessarily internationally, but also locally. And I mean, the whole situation that is happening in cities like Barcelona or Venice is related to a pre-existing problem. So the solutions that we are seeing being implemented today are actually, interestingly, something that we've been looking for a long time. Now, the other thing we need to be careful, though, is that when we talk about those issues, this is not about an Airbnb ban, okay? This is about creating a regulatory framework for short-term let, which appear on platforms like Airbnb, but they appear on many other platforms, which have been obviously one of the facilitators of such huge problem. The problem is, of course, is about making people willing to travel and utilize facilities like hotel. But the problem at the base of this is the fact that there is a huge interference with the availability of property for rent for local residents.
Yes.
And so, of course, you know, we need to be careful in distinguishing between the two issues. Is about, of course, we want tourists to go to hotels and utilize obviously perfectly legal establishment, but at the same time, we need to be careful that situation like this and ban like this don't create other, I would say, problems.
I'm Dan Whitehead and I'm Sky News' West of England correspondent.
Welcome back to the programme. We want to bring you up to date on that breaking news coming out of Bolivia. As we're reporting, Reuters are reporting a witness has seen an army tank hitting the entrance to the country's national palace. And you can see there some of the images that are coming in to us showing troops running through the streets of La Paz. And as we reported, Reuters are saying that a witness has seen an army tank hitting the entrance to the country's national palace. The president of Bolivia, Luis Arce, has warned that these are irregular deployments of troops that are taking place in the capital at present. He's also taken to X, formerly known as Twitter, and called for democracy to be respected. Now, the former president of Bolivia, Evo Morales, has also put out a message on X denouncing the movement of the military in the square outside the palace and called it a coup in the making. So some concerns of irregular deployment of troops taking place in the center of La Paz, the capital of Bolivia. And witnesses are also reporting that they have seen an army tank hitting the entrance to the country's national palace. We're still waiting to get more information, but these are currently the images that we have coming out of La Paz. But for now, that's it from a slightly shorter The World with me, Yalda Hakim. We'll be back, of course, tomorrow night at 9 p.m.